Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Daniel C. Andreae President's Lecture on the Future of Work. My name is Dr. Nikki Woods. I'm Institute Director for TIER, and it is my pleasure to be your host and moderator for today's session. We begin our conversation with gratitude for the land on which we all work and study. Many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with territories that precede the establishment of the University Health Network. For thousands of years, the land on which our research institute sits has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We cannot begin to make meaningful change without first acknowledging the truths of colonialism and the harms of forced displacement of Indigenous peoples. My hope is that as we meet today to learn about broadening participation in science, that we carefully attend to the voices of communities that are most impacted by colonialism, racism, and social injustice, and that we do the difficult work ahead with a rich understanding of the land that affords us this opportunity, and with recognition and celebration of the ancestors who came before us and the communities that continue to thrive here. We're able to bring you today's exciting session through the generosity of Dr. Daniel C. Andreae. With over 20 years of professional experience in the education sector, Dr. Andreae has established himself as a highly distinguished and esteemed expert in health, neuroscience, psychology, advocacy, and community organization. He is pleased to be the founder of this lecture series that explores some of society's most critical issues that not only affect us today, but also shape our future. And this year is no exception. Every year, inspiring speakers are invited to share their insightful perspectives based on a foundation of unfettered, evidence-based science and research. Dan, like all of us, believe that it is critical that scientists and educators have autonomy and that we have platforms like this for open dialogue. In that spirit, we are incredibly grateful for the opportunity to support two developing health professionals through the Dr. Daniel C. Andreae President's Awards. These are an incredibly important part of our lecture series, and every year we receive many worthy applications. It gives me great honor to announce our two recipients for this year. The Dr. Daniel C. Andreae President's Award for a Michener student in an advanced diploma program is Sharon Law. Sharon is a radiological technology student at the Michener Institute for Education at UHN and is currently in the final year of her clinical placement at UHN. Having the privilege to train in a research hospital has inspired Sharon to pursue research and practice to bridge the gap between the clinical environment and research in an increasingly interprofessional environment. The Dr. Daniel C. Andreae President's Award for a UHN research trainee is Justin Lamb. Justin is a second-year PhD student in the Health Professions Education Research concentration offered by the Institute for Health Policy Management and Evaluation. Justin is also a Wilson Center Research Fellow and an Academic General Pediatrics Fellow at SickKids. His long-term career goal is to be a clinician scientist at an academic pediatric hospital with a research focus on the intersection of hidden curriculum effects, learner professionalization, and the learning environment. Justin has a particular interest in structural level EDI issues. Congratulations to you both. Through the efforts of our lecturers, such as Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, who has graciously provided his time to speak with us today, may you both continue to ask questions in an environment that welcomes and encourages your curiosity and makes room for diverse perspectives. We are also grateful once again to have the sponsorship of Elsevier for today's lecture. We've partnered with Elsevier for 3 years and greatly appreciate their support of this series. I will now ask Judy Verses, President of Academic and Government Markets at Elsevier, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Nikki, and hello, everyone. It is a great pleasure to join you all today. And I thank the Institute of Education Research at UHN for their continued partnership with Elsevier to bring you the third in the Dr. Daniel C. Andreae's President's Lecture Series. And I am truly humbled to have the opportunity to introduce this year's most distinguished speaker, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski III. And as an educator, mathematician, and an advocate for equity and diversity, Dr. Hrabowski is one of the most influential leaders of our time. From his formative experiences as a child leader in the civil rights movements in the 1960s to his impeccable credentials that span decades of achievements, it's impossible to fit Dr. Hrabowski's contributions to education, science, and society in just a brief introduction, but I'm going to give it a try. And I'll start from chairing the National Academy's committee that produced the 2011 report called Expanding Underrepresented Minority Participation, and it's America's Science and Technology Talent at the Crossroads, to being appointed in 2012 by President Obama to chair the President's Advisory Commission on Education Excellence for African Americans, to his recent election to the National Academy of Engineering, and to being named as the inaugural Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. commemorative lecture speaker by Harvard University. And the list goes on and on. I said I couldn't do it justice. He has had an impact on a generation of scientists and educators, thanks to not only his important research and publications on science and math, but also his lifelong devotion to addressing inequalities and advancing participation of underrepresented minorities in STEM fields. Dr. Hrabowski led the University of Maryland, Baltimore County for 30 years. And during his tenure, UMBC has become one of the most innovative and research-intensive universities in the U.S., among the best in undergraduate teaching, and basically overall a bastion of excellence. And equally important, this is really important to me, Dr. Hrabowski is renowned for transforming the college into the strongest pipeline of Black graduates that go on to earn doctorates in natural sciences and engineering, and more so than any other U.S. college. And his impact goes further still. I mean, when we consider the diverse leaders in science and academia that he has mentored, who carry on his legacy and profound ethos. Again, incredible impact overall. And earlier this year, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute announced a $1.5 billion program to support the next generation of diverse faculty in science, technology, engineering, and math. They named the initiative the Freeman Hrabowski Scholars Program. And to me, that not only underscores his impact, puts exclamation points after it on what he has done in supporting early career scientists of diverse backgrounds. And so today, Dr. Hrabowski will examine how healthcare organizations and academic institutions can support success by cultivating an empowering institutional culture. And drawing from his vast experiences, he will discuss access to education and the responsibility for training the next generation of scientists and healthcare professionals. And as you would expect, this is a topic very close to our hearts at Elsevier. The many challenges of our time, such as climate action, sustainability, and obviously with COVID, emerging disease, requires us to harness the contribution of diverse researchers to find solutions that can benefit all of society. And as a publisher of more than 2,800 scientific, technical, and medical journals, and as an information analytics company, we aim to contribute to this equity effort by promoting and driving inclusion and diversity in research and in healthcare through an evidence-based approach and an approach that's informed by data and drives to action. So to share his perspectives on the vital importance of broadening participation in the scientific workforce, please join me in a warm welcome to our most distinguished speaker, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski.
Hello, I'm Freeman Hrabowski, and I'm delighted to be talking to you today when I talked with Dr. Nikki Woods and others, and I want to thank Judy for that amazing introduction. I often say the longer the introduction, the older the person. So I was getting a little depressed there for a while, but I was so amazed with her attention to detail in all of that. And I am delighted to be talking to you, people from around the world, with a special emphasis, though, on you in Canada and on what I see as some of the challenges we face in humankind as we think about diversifying the workforce, building that scientific workforce. And I want to begin with the notion that even as we talk about increasing the number of people in science and engineering, in medicine, in healthcare, in those areas, that in addition to thinking about scientific expertise, we should not forget the larger context of the humanities, the social sciences in those areas. It's what I use the language of Jim Collins from his book, Good to Great, the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. It's not science or the humanities. It has to be science, medicine, engineering, math, and social sciences, humanities, and the arts in those areas. And so as I talk today, while as a mathematician, you may hear this sense that I get goosebumps with math. You should also know I'm constantly thinking about the human condition, as we all must, as we think about the future of the scientific workforce, because the future of the scientific workforce is inextricably linked to the future of humankind. As I thought about how to begin, I decided to think about something that was a human experience, and that is the childhood experience of each of us. We all are products of our childhood experiences. And mine, I'm now in Baltimore, but I grew up in what's called the Deep South in Alabama, in Birmingham, and was a child leader with Dr. King in that civil rights movement. And it never could have occurred to me that I'd be talking with people from other countries. I could not have imagined having been president at a university that has students from over 100 countries. And a part of my message today, that as we think about the future of the scientific workforce, whether in Canada or in America, it is a global workforce. I decided to be the potential resident of Canada. And I went and looked at everything I could find on what's happening there, what the languages you use as you work to attract people. Let me give you an example. You talk about the fact that there have been times when we've had a decline in students from other countries that come to America, foreign students who come to America, because we've been known for that strength, and how you've taken advantage of that, and how you have literally increased substantially the number of people coming from other countries. That anyone who understands the scientific workforce appreciates this global connection, this connection across countries, and the need for comparisons and ways of collaborating. And quite frankly, what's most significant is what you say is something any country that is working to be as economically strong as possible, as healthy as possible, is working to attract the best talent from anywhere in the world. There's no doubt about that. And when you look at in America, you'll see that a large percentage of the STEM graduates come from other countries. 60% of the students on my campus in Baltimore literally have a parent from another country. But what's interesting is that, and you see the performance of immigrants in other countries. One of the points of comparison that you make there in some of the studies I show that, interestingly enough, you're relying more and more on people coming from other countries, and that a number of them are with STEM backgrounds, but that many of those who come with STEM backgrounds don't get into STEM careers. That in our country, in America, that we are much more proactive in making sure those with that scientific background get to those kind of careers, and we pay them more. That it seems that you pay there, according to studies that I saw there in Canada. And but what you're doing that's really good is you're attracting more talent by having policies that make it easier for the person who graduates there to stay there and become a permanent resident, which is what any enlightened nation would be doing. I think it's fair to say that the world looks to Canada as the best educated society in our country, in our world. You've got 56 or so % people with a college education. What's interesting, though, just as a comparison, before I get into strategies for broadening participation and thinking about larger context, I should tell you that my campus has probably 60% of our students going on with degrees in the graduate in the sciences and engineering through the graduate programs. And most important, connecting as you do with healthcare, with the environment, for us with defense and intelligence, and looking at ethical considerations in all those areas. But the key to building that successful scientific workforce begins well before college. And the question is, what's happening in Canada? What's happening in our country, in America? What's happening in other places? And there's several sources of information. I work with the International Math and Science Competition, and what for years I did. And right now, if you look at the International Student Achievement, the PISA data, it is interesting to see that the countries that do the best in looking at the 15-year-olds would necessarily be from Asian parts of the world, China, Singapore, Hong Kong. But in the top 10 is Canada. America is not in that top 10. I want to give you credit for that. And I've been saying that to my friends here. Look at what Canada is doing. Similarly, when we look at the best educated systems of education, Canada is in that top 5. Now, in that sense, what's interesting is America is seen to have, by all global comparisons, the best education system, though our 15-year-olds don't do as well as you do in Canada and some other places, where we both have and so I commend you on building that education and workforce as we all are working to do. But when we get to STEM, here's the deciding point. Unlike the countries that are doing the best job in producing more STEM graduates percentage-wise, true, you have increased substantially in the last 10 years. You've doubled the number of STEM degrees, but the percent of the students overall who are in STEM is still not in that top group, as America is not in that top group. Let me just say that countries above 30% STEM degrees would include Germany, Singapore, Iran as examples, and China and India are off the charts, as you know, because of the base. Each has over 1 billion people, so they are producing so many people in these areas. Now, why is that important? I think we all would agree we need more broadly educated people with STEM backgrounds because the jobs that we're creating require those STEM experiences and backgrounds, whether in the life sciences, in public health related areas, in medicine, particularly in artificial intelligence, in environmental areas. And what the research tells us is the more diverse that workforce, the richer the problem solving, and the more inclusive we can be. And we build more trust. I don't think any example of the need for inclusive excellence can be shown then with the COVID situation in the past few years. In your country, in our country, we have seen that people from underrepresented groups have often not trusted the science or the medicine, have not necessarily been willing to take the vaccine. And if they don't see people looking like themselves, and they look at the history, for example, in our country, and some of the major challenges of people being used, people have not been willing to take that vaccine. We are working on that, and I'll say something about that later on. But what I want you to think about most importantly is that whether you're talking about Canada or many other countries throughout Europe and in America, the fact is that the percentage of those getting degrees in these STEM areas and STEM-related areas is far below what we would like them to be. And the question becomes, what can we do to make a difference? And that's where the work that I worked on with the National Academy of Sciences in our country is, I think, important, not only for you and for Canada, for America, but for a number of countries. It is a fact that, and I've read some studies in Canada that will show people may start, first of all, that we need more people interested in STEM from the beginning. We need to be able to show examples. We need to be able to disaggregate data. That's one of your shortcomings. Since I've told you you're the best educated in the world, I can say anything about you now. I can just tell, but you have work to do, as we have work to do. And it's that, and your researchers have said you must disaggregate the data in looking at gender, in looking at race, in looking at indigenous people, and looking at first generation college, and looking at immigrants. It's not enough just to say Canadian is Canadian, just as it isn't enough to say American is American. We need to look at every group to see how they're doing, who's interested in the work, how we can get them more interested in coming in that direction, how they're doing in pre-college work. Because when you look at your persistence rates and ours, we still have numbers of students who start in college and don't continue on. And it has to do sometimes with the financial support, but often with the academic background. And here's the point, as a mathematician, I can say this, that if you give me a child who can read well, I can teach her to solve a word problem. And if you're thinking about chemistry or physics or engineering or problems in AI, they are usually discussed or presented in language, reading skills. And if you can read and think, then you can go to equations and then you can get to the math. And so I'm saying that as we think about broadening participation, we have to look at that pre-college experience, the strength of that. We have to look at reading skills and math skills, science skills. We need to look at whether or not people are getting examples of a Dr. Nikki Woods, of people who are professionals, who look like them, who can represent groups and say, you can be like me. And we need to find ways of understanding, as your researchers in Canada are saying, of the barriers. What are the barriers keeping people from becoming faculty members, or faculty members who don't feel that they're being appreciated, or for people who never make it through the undergraduate experience? And so the National Academy study, which is, it's called the study at the crossroads. It's called the Crossroads study, done 10 years ago, really said that while we need to work on pre-college experiences, the place that it was American talent at the crossroads, that the most fundamentally significant step in broadening participation will be the undergraduate experience. In other words, we need more who come to college who are well prepared, but even students who are well prepared in both of our countries often leave STEM within the first year or two. In fact, in our country, we call them weed out courses. And the question is, to what extent can each institution and each department at an institution use analytics to understand who, looking at gender, looking at race, looking at background, first generation college or not, is succeeding and who is not. And a part of that has to do with the culture of universities, but the same thing can be said when talking about health professionals broadly. And so there, in the book that my colleagues and I most recently wrote, entitled The Empowered University, the subtitle is Shared Leadership, Culture Change, and Success, Academic Success. And the idea is not about one person, a president or the department chair. It's about groups of leaders who have this vision that we can have more people from different backgrounds coming in, being supported and welcomed. That's the question. Do the people feel welcome? And making sure they succeed. And that's about having mentors and champions. The mentor is someone who is there for you when you have a question and can give you advice. But the champion, that we need in healthcare, we need it in computing fields, we need it in STEM broadly. Champions are professionals who will not only be there when someone comes, but will be proactive. We'll say to the young Nikki Woods, you've got potential. We want to think about what your career is going to be. And you're in this job now, you're doing well, you're not doing that well. Let's look at how we can improve. The champion will knock down doors. We need more people who can be champions for women and for people of color, underrepresented groups. Now, here's what we think about. I talk often about my TED Talk, which is on success in college STEM. But the success that I talk about and the strategies can be used not only in the college environment, but in the professional environment. When I'm working with medical systems, when I'm working with corporations, I say the same fundamental strategies can be effective. Number one, having high expectations. But the difference is, it's not just high expectations of the student or the new worker, it's high expectations of ourselves, those of us in power. Because when we're in power, whether we are a physician or a scientist or an administrator, things are working fairly well from our perspective. But the question is, are we with the high expectations to say, but am I putting myself in the shoes of that person coming in who's new to this system, who may look different from most people around here who are in power? And what do I need to do to make sure I'm creating an environment, a culture that will be welcoming and supportive? And supportive doesn't always mean simply being positive. It means having that person's best interest in mind, giving that person honest feedback, giving that person praise when important, but also being honest when there are challenges. And so the idea of the high expectations, both of the student or of the employee, but also of us in powerful positions. And then number two, building community. In science, we know that there is a general culture of cutthroat competition. Let me give you one example. If I'm the math teacher and I grade on the curve, then two students will be reluctant to work together because each is thinking, is she going to tell me everything she knows? Because if she doesn't tell me everything she knows and I tell her everything I know, her grade is higher. She gets the higher grade from me. And so the idea is one person against another, as opposed to thinking about building community the way we do in research projects, in labs, where people are working together to achieve a goal, to grasp concepts, to do rich problem solving, and where the group moves ahead as they make discoveries. And so the idea of building community among students and faculty as thought leaders is important. And then third, it takes a professional to produce a professional. It takes a scientist to produce a scientist, in the same way that it really takes an artist to help a young artist hone his or her skills. And so we in professions, healthcare, in the environment, computer scientists, those in health professions, we bring people into the work, whether we are physicians or in other healthcare areas, or scientists or engineers or computer scientists, pulling the people into the work. Hands-on experiences is the idea. It's the idea of helping that student make it through those first 2 years at the undergrad level with solid Bs, we say. On my campus at UMBC, students who get Cs will be encouraged in the first year chemistry to retake the course. Because if your background is not strong enough, you're not going to be able to excel at the next level. So that studying science is like layers of reading skills, but like music. I play classical piano, but you don't start off playing Beethoven. You have basics first. I'm studying French. You don't start off being fluent, but nous parlons le français avec mes étudiants. My colleagues and I are working with our students all the time. My students said, don't you think you're kind of old? That's the other point, that we're never too old to learn. So j'étudie le français avec mes étudiants tous les jours. I know some of you in Canada speak French. I'm studying j'étudie le philosophe français, Monsieur Hugo, Mademoiselle Beauvoir. And what am I saying? I'm saying that bringing excitement to learning, whether it's on the job or it's in the classroom, can make a big difference. We don't want the work to be boring, and it is challenging. Anybody who studies STEM knows it's challenging, but it can be very rewarding. We've got to get that point across to people. And so the TED Talk on the high expectations, building community, scientists producing scientists, professionals producing, and then rigorous evaluation. And that's what we say in that book, The Empowered University, that we must be empowered to look in the mirror at ourselves as a Canadian society, as an American society, in healthcare, in education, in STEM workforce, and say, what's going well and what else do we need to do? Yes, we are increasing the number of STEM graduates, but how does our production compare with countries with which we compete? And are we increasing those numbers? I was stunned when I saw a comparison between China and America, given that China's numbers are much bigger. But when I saw a statistic that said, yeah, America hopes to increase its STEM workforce, STEM graduates degrees by 30% between now and 2030, but China will increase it by 300%. That kind of investment in science. Look at all the global geopolitical issues we face in our society. Now, in some ways, with all the brain power, with China being at that head, we see the challenges they're facing right now with COVID. So, and this is why when I say STEM is related to social sciences, to attitudes, to values. And when we talk about culture change, whether it's in China, in Canada, at UMBC, in America, the idea is this. I leave you with the idea of Eric Weiner, who wrote the book, The Geography of Bliss. And he says, culture, I really like this, is the sea we swim in, so all-consuming that we fail to recognize it until we step out of it and look back at ourselves. And that's what I want to challenge you there in Canada to do, to step out of yourselves. What is the culture? To what extent are you asking the right questions? It was Hrabowski, the Nobel laureate, who said when he was growing up in New York, all of his friends' mothers would say, what'd you learn in school today? He said, not my mother. My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? And so if we're going to talk about broadening scientific workforce, we have to talk about what are the questions we have to ask as we look at best strategies. And those are questions such as, have we looked at data by race and gender, first generation college immigrants? What are the differences? Have we listened to the voices of those who have not been represented? Are we willing to hear things that we may not like to hear? Very important. I'm working with our American Council on Education right now and looking at how we prepare leaders in higher education, just as companies do that. And I would ask the question, to what extent is there a proactive approach for producing not only people who will be in the lab, sciences, and the doctors, but also leaders in healthcare? What other approaches used? And I would say building community and collaboration, but a proactive approach is very important. I am so honored by the Howard Hughes money. If you look at that effort, there is $500 million, beyond the $1.5 billion, that's devoted to replicating this MyHealth program at UMBC that we started 30 years ago. If you look at the 60 Minutes piece on the MyHealth program in UMBC, you can see what that program is about. It really features the TED Talk that I'm talking about now. But the significance is, Howard Hughes is putting $500 million into the life sciences in those areas to replicate programs around the country at the undergrad level. But the $1.5 billion, which is really significant, will produce scientists of color and others interested in these areas who become champions for inclusive excellence. And that's what I would challenge every country to think about. What is it doing to produce not only scientists of color, physicians of color, but others who may not be from underrepresented groups, but who are committed to those things? And I want to close with this because I'm ready, almost eager to get into the questions. I want you to look up the name Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett and the name of Dr. Khafre Zarasa. These are two of my graduates, African Americans of the MyHealth program. Dr. Zarasa got the Young Neuroscientist Award 2 years ago. He has invented a pacemaker for the brain to address schizophrenia and bipolar disease. He is has an endowed chair at Duke University, was a track star at UMBC. Brilliant. Just went into the National Academy of Medicine and is a Howard Hughes investigator. And fewer than 2%, about 2% of the HHMI investigators are Black. So I'm very proud of him. And the other is Dr. Kizzmekia Corbett, Corbett. I get goosebumps when thinking about both these young students because they represent inclusive excellence. Dr. Corbett, we recruited at 17 from a small town in North Carolina. She's now a faculty member at Harvard, but she co-led the team that invented the Moderna vaccine. She's the first Black woman in the world to create a vaccine, and she's mid-30s. So when she walks into a room and someone says that, every little girl in there says, I want to be like her. And that's what we need. We need these professionals in this country, in Canada, and others, women, indigenous people, Blacks, others underrepresented, who can say to the world, it's possible. We can do this and we can produce many more. Looking forward to the questions, and I'm delighted to be here, Nikki. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for getting us started. I am incredibly excited. I have probably a gazillion questions. They're all kind of jotted down, but I did promise all of my colleagues and all of our friends that tuned in that they would also get a chance to ask questions. So we do have a platform that we're using called Slido. So I'd like to encourage everyone and anyone who can hear me right now who's listening live to log on to slido.com. And if you enter the code Freeman, so our hashtag today is just Freeman, you can enter the code there and you can type in any question, any comment that you'd like to ask, and I will relay it here to Dr. Hrabowski, maybe before I ask my own, but probably not. So you might want to get on there quickly. You see, it already happened. Somebody beat me to it before I could even get my question out. Someone has asked one. So I will actually ask someone else's question first. But again, before I do that, I want to say thank you so much. I do have a million things to ask you that I'm definitely going to get to.
Right.
So the first one is, what do you think is the best way in the moment to engage a student who is not interested in the topic you're trying to teach?
Right, it's a great question, and it will always depend on the level of the student. And I enjoy talking about pre-K education. I think we in education and higher education should be as concerned about what happens with children as we are with people at the graduate level. And so my first two books were on raising children who like math and science, and they were Black children back, and people are still buying those books, Beating the Odds and Overcoming the Odds. And one of the most important approaches I found with children, boys and girls, was using Legos at that level, just to encourage the curiosity, using Legos and using cooking and math, and for teaching word problems, and money But you'd be surprised how many people don't understand that a dime is the same as 10 cents, which is 1/10 of a dollar and 10%. Just basic kinds of things at that level. And then as they in high school, getting to see practical applications is really important, very important, because the fact is that often in geometry, for example, everybody around the world takes geometry. And usually when you ask a geometry teacher, why am I studying this? The person will say, you're studying it because it's going to teach you how to think. And the kid is thinking, yeah, I know how to think. I think it sucks. And the fact is that we've not shown the connection. But when people take geometry and connect it to construction, and they begin to see how the Pythagorean theorem is used in measuring, and it takes on meaning. It's very important. And then finally, at the college level, you have a different kind of challenge, but group work makes the difference. Lecturing, the research shows 20% at most of people, that the average person listening to a lecture can't stay with it more than 20 minutes. It's got to be interaction. You've got to engage the student, connect the student to the topic in one way or the other. That would be my advice.
Thank you. And that's such an important point. We learned a lot over the pandemic about the importance of keeping all of our students engaged in the lecture material and how difficult that can be. We lost a lot of opportunities to do the interactivity, the group learning, all of those pieces. It's been amazing to see some of the innovation that's happened locally to address that. That's certainly something we have to keep thinking about.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Again, they're coming in pretty fast and furious. Okay, so my next comment is thank you for this talk. Love to hear your comment, or sorry, someone already said they love hearing the comment that you made about being able and capable of hearing the things that make us uncomfortable. So that really resonated with me. I think it's one of the most important things a leader can do is be prepared to hear things they don't like to hear. So what would your advice be on how we can actually foster those types of difficult conversations, especially when there can be important power dynamics at play?
It's such an important part as we think about what's happening in companies, in health systems, in universities, in our societies, divided when you get to politics. And there's several things that come to mind, things we did at the university, but that I recommend. One is having some basic rules about what people can and cannot say and how it's to be said. One of the things I often say is those the gods wish to destroy, they first make angry. I'm always telling people, don't let people make you angry and show your anger, because you're never your best. Breathe deeply and try to listen to what the person is saying, even when it sounds really outlandish, because you want to be able to be effective and you have to stay calm. Number two, something my mother, who was an English teacher, she would quote a poet, Emily Dickinson, who said, tell the truth, but tell it slant. Now, let me tell you what that means. If you just say to people, you guys suck, this is really bad, in that way, most people can't hear it. They get really defensive. But if you can ask a question or plant a seed or give an example, in other words, the truth has to be told in a way that people can hear it. And if it's too painful, they won't hear anything. And so you want to strategize about what can you say in this group? And then the other part for people often, if they're not in power, is what can I say and not end up being punished, or somebody becomes vengeful when I tell the truth, for example. And that gets to a part of another question I saw somewhere here about why is it that a lot of immigrants are not in STEM, even if they have a background in STEM, are not in STEM work. Well, what your own researchers there in Canada are saying is there are many barriers for immigrants that there are, that actually, interestingly enough, that America, that's one way that America, I want to give America credit, they really do believe in bringing our immigrants in and getting them into STEM fields. That it appears that Canada is not as proactive in getting them into STEM, to higher paying STEM jobs. And one of the areas they said barriers and just biases that exist without people realizing how biased they are. But the question is, how does one say that with language that is going to be accepted by people? And it sometimes means you don't tell the whole deal at one time. You give them example to begin opening their eyes. And you look for people in power who are reasonable and who want to make a difference. You can always find some people who say, give me a sense of what it is. And then finally, sometimes if you're going to be in that kind of discussion, it's better for several people to talk in advance about who's going to say what and how do we say it in a way to get our point across and to protect ourselves, quite frankly. But let me tell you, real progress comes when organizations and societies are willing to hear things that may be uncomfortable for them to hear. One of the French poets, Apollinaire, says, "La joie venait toujours après la peine." It means the joy comes after the struggle. Sometimes it takes a little struggle to see the light, but it takes time and building relationships and trust to be able to tell people what you really think. But the question to people in power is, are you listening to those voices that are usually not at the table? That's the big question. If you're not, if it's a room of all men, the group is missing out on a lot because men really don't know how women think. I'll tell you a group that's really enlightened in America that may surprise some that I work closely with, the National Security Agency. They are they're close to my campus. We've got 1,200 graduates there. General Paul Nakasone is amazing in believing in diversity, and they get the point that this diversity and inclusivity are important to understand how different kinds of people solve problems as they work to protect our country, you see. And they know that, for example, that a Black who is raised in a suburban area will be different from one who comes from another country or different from one who's from an urban area. They solve problems differently. And they want to understand all of those ways. Now, let me say something that's particularly significant. Some of the countries that we may have concerns about, like Russia, do more with women in technology than we do in America. That you see, and many of the professors in America women have a Russian background. We're very proud they're here. But I'm saying, if we know men don't know how women think, and mainly men are solving all the problems their way, we're missing out in understanding other cultures and other genders and how they do things. All of that to say, it's important to learn how to have the hard conversation and leave there feeling we can make some progress. That's the point.
Yeah. And I think along the same lines of uncomfortable conversations and things that we don't always want to hear, why do you think it is that universities, so many research hospitals, but particularly how many universities why are they already so comfortable with acknowledging and knowing how many students leave STEM during that weed out year? It's not like people think that the scientific workforce is already really broad and yet comfortable with that.
Yeah.
So why do you think that persists?
I will tell you, I for years and years, I've worked with new college presidents who are sometimes from Canada, from America, from different parts of Asia and Africa, Latin America. And the question I always get is, how do I help my experts believe that it's not okay that only about a third of people who start in the discipline stay in the discipline? Because people will say that's about normal. That's what happens. Because we tend to think the world will be the way it is. The world will be the way it is. So for years, people felt that medicine was mainly for men, for example. In my country, and you can talk about Canada, but there was a reason that there was much more money given to prostate cancer than to breast cancer, because the scientists tended to be men up until a few decades ago, and the politicians. So they related to the prostate cancer, didn't realize what a serious challenge breast cancer is, didn't have either the scientists or the politicians. So you didn't have the woman's perspective there, you see. And it takes another level of enlightenment for someone in power to say, what about people who don't look like me? Why are they not at the table? What is it I'm not learning and could be if I heard their perspective? It's very important. I will tell you that Dr. Corbett, in working with NIH and Moderna, was a major champion for making sure she brought more people of color and Blacks into the study before the vaccine was given out. So much so she convinced my wife and me to be in there and to go around talking about the fact that we had it, we're okay, and all of that, because she knew, because of her background, by the way, in science and in sociology, she understood it's not just the science, it's the social context. And so she could bring those perspectives to that work as a Black woman trained in both science and social science. And we need much more of that. If we don't have people from different groups, racial, ethnic groups, gender, LGBTQ, then we don't hear those perspectives. And we don't know how whatever we're doing will have an impact on other people. And most important, the public won't trust us. The more inclusive we are at a hospital or whatever, the more trust there will be. And the research shows, quite frankly, that people of color often don't get the quality of care, that there are biases that objective health professionals have. And we know that while many people are wonderful people, we have biases sometimes we don't even know we have. That's what I would say, all of us.
So I think this next question is just perfectly aligned. We talked a lot so far about diversity.
Yes.
The aim of the series is really to address a few issues, both diversity and equity and inclusivity. Of course, diversity and equity are both important, but very different.
Yeah.
So can you comment on efforts that institutions need to make in order to address equity issues and really to increase also the representation of racialized students?
Sure. So I'm going to say something I said at Harvard a few weeks ago, and I'm saying around the world. And that is that too often on our campuses in any country, we understand the need for people like each other to be with each other. It's only a human experience that people want to be with people similar to themselves. But first of all, that universities have not found ways of building a culture that would encourage interaction, substantive interaction among people from different groups. I start there. And so and if it doesn't happen in higher education, it's not going to happen. It really does not. That's one of the challenges. Secondly, when people talk to me about this issue of equity, I always say, let's have two people start a race. One kid has been given training for years in running, and the other kid hadn't been given any training in running. They're both 17 years old. And the second kid not only hadn't been given any training, but hadn't had the experience to build the legs up at all, or the breathing up, has had all kinds of disadvantages. And then we call ourselves giving them an equal opportunity, and we put them at the start line. And then we say, run the race. This is a diversity and this is equality, but it certainly is not equity. Equity takes into account background and support and resources. And so when students come to that campus, the question is, what is the academic background? What's the financial situation? How is the student viewing the campus? Is the student feeling welcomed? Have people been given professional development to look at people different from themselves and to make sure that they are showing that support that pulls them into the work? And most important, are we listening to the reactions and creating the kind of environment where people can tell you what they really think? That this is the way I feel. I was at a very prestigious university giving a talk, and they had a young Black woman introduce me. And this was not Harvard, this was another very prestigious university. And she said, every day I'm here, the men look at me with a look that seems to say, how did you get here? And do you really deserve to be here? And sometimes they make comments that assume they know who I am because I'm Black. They have no idea of what I've been through to get here to this point. While their granddaddies went here, I'm the first to go to college. I didn't have the high school background, and yet I worked really hard, but they have no sense of that. They feel they are entitled to be here because their granddaddy was here. All right, and there you get to that issue of equity. And here's what's most important when thinking about healthcare, when thinking about scientific work. As a mathematician, I can say this. The bottom line finally is the person knows the work or the person doesn't know the work. The person can think critically or not. The person can solve problems effectively or not. That's finally, you have to get there. The question is, what is that environment doing to help that student or that person have the opportunity to succeed through hard work, coaching, mentoring, other things, so that the person is finally at a position? Because when somebody's on the operating table, they really want to know you're really effective as a surgeon. That's final. So we get that. The standard has to be there. But what we talk about on my campus and what I'm saying around the country is we must have high standards, not only for the academic rigor, but also for the level of support. There is equity, the level of support. What is it this student needs to succeed? In the same way that we need to be looking at students with physical handicaps or challenges, disabilities, as we say, right? How do we give them the support that they need? I have my valedictorian at UMBC last year could barely move a finger or two. Brilliant woman, all A's in the biochemistry area. And she had not thought about getting a PhD. And she said to Mike Summers, who's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, Howard Hughes investigator, I can do the work intellectually, but I can't move my body. And she said, and he said this to her: science is about thinking. It's about thinking. We can have people who can take instructions from you on what you want to get done through the technology, but you're the thinker. And even though you can't move hands and arms, you can be a great scientist. You see, that opened her eyes to the possibilities. Well, the same thing is true with people who may come with other kinds of challenges, including needing more support academically or emotionally or financially. The point is, you want to get them to the point where they can excel. So it's the high expectations of rigor, of academic rigor, and of support. There's where you talk about equity.
Mm-hmm. This is wonderful. And you were just, so many things that you're saying are resonating with me personally and with the experience of so many of my colleagues and students. So thank you so much. So we have another comment here. Thank you for a wonderful talk. Clearly, everyone is very much enjoying today's session. High stakes exams are one of the barriers that have likely excluded underrepresented groups from STEM programs. Do you have any ideas about how high stakes exams or high stakes exam systems, entrance exams, licensure exams, how they can be improved in ways that might eliminate some of these barriers?
Sure. So my campus has always had an emphasis on standardized tests, SATs. In the recent years with COVID, we have made the test optional, as have others in my system. But we are looking at their skills levels through our placement exams, through courses they've had and grades and the schools, all right? I say this, and I often have to say this to students of color when they say the tests don't count. Someone know the tests do count, because if you're gonna pass medical exams, if you got a law exam, nursing exam, you're finally gonna have to do well on these tests at a certain level. Here's the difference. My wealthiest friends, who often have sent their kids to boarding schools, have made sure that those kids of any race have had a certain kind of test prep starting in middle school. So when you see kids at the Ivies with the 1500 SATs, it's not just because they're genius or something. No, they've been going through these tests all these years, even if the family doesn't talk about it. All right, you know, and that's what I know. And the reason I know, I wrote the questions for the math SAT, so I always tell people, you can throw eggs at me, because I have. And the reason I could do it though was my mom had been that English teacher who became a math teacher, and she taught me this relationship between reading and math and word problems. And that's standardized tests they're reading exams. And one of the challenges for kids who don't come from a house of a lot of books is that their reading skills will not be where they need to be. They may be able to read some, but the depth of reading, the understanding in the reading. So I'm going to say two things. We shouldn't be holding people back at certain levels because the score is not, because the tests are not perfect. They are not perfect. I had students who might make mid 600s in math SAT versus somebody with a perfect score, and they might end up doing just as well in courses, you know, so there's a range you can talk about. Below a certain level, I know I have students with certain challenges. So we need to be talking about ranges rather than the idea that somebody with a 750 math is so much better than somebody with a 650 math. That's silly. And so what I'm saying is the tests are far from perfect. Number two, at the lower levels, they should be used as, I think, diagnostic to see what students need rather than so much holding people out. But we need, and this is the part that some people may not agree with, but we have to prepare students, give them opportunities to take enough tests to get over the anxiety, to learn to read critically, to prepare for that nursing exam or that MCAT or that LSAT in our country. I mean, all these exams, and because it's even true with fire department, all kinds of places where people have to take exams. You don't want somebody operating on you who is not proven that they have the knowledge. Now, there's more that they need, so it's not like the test is sufficient, but it is necessary at certain levels. So testing will be a necessary part of education for many students, but we don't have to use it to exclude below a certain level. That's what I'm saying. Use it more diagnostically. That would be my answer.
That's wonderful. I love that. And we have a question here from one of our colleagues from Women's College Hospital, and it just flew off my screen. Here it is. It says, I'm from Maryland and now in Toronto. The programs you built were well integrated into the UM system. How did you build it? So I think you've inspired some efforts to change here. What narrative did you use to start the program to address
It's such a great question, and I should be saying coming back to Maryland, but I'm glad
No, don't say that.
And I should tell you, some of my students are Canadian, and many do come back to swimmers. And we actually had the Canadian youth chess champion who became the Canadian chess champion, the Grand Master and all. He's in New York now. I'm very proud of that. Very proud. But here's the point. You're right. We had a number of naysayers in the late 80s. What they said, I said, show me students of color who are excelling, who were educated in America. And the Black kids they found had been educated in English and French systems. They were, from Ghana or Nigeria and British, you see, or Senegal and French, and they were just superior. They were coming from another country. They were hungry. They were intense. They'd had a better education, and they did well. But I said, show me Blacks from America, all right, who've been here for a generation. We just did not have them. It was, a student who had a 2.8 from UMBC could get into med school just because the only kids getting in were from HBCUs, and we're not that. We're predominantly white. But we were not finding students who had A's in courses. And so I said, we need to get students to the point where they can earn A's in upper level science courses. And they said unilaterally, it will take 1 or 2 generations. And I said, I thought you were scientists. And he said, what do you mean by that? I said, you're basing that conclusion on your anecdotal information. You haven't seen it. You're not basing it on the data. We need to experiment. That was the narrative that I used. Let's experiment. Let's see what's possible if we try these strategies. And what we learn that can help students of color can help our white students also. And that's what's happened. It was that approach of saying, let's experiment with students from underrepresented groups and others. Use a strengths-based approach. Don't make them feel like they're deficient. Let them understand we know what they've gone through to get here. That gives them a level of strength. Help them to feel they're doing it not just for themselves, but to help other people and to become models for others. And there's a nobility in that idea of paying it forward that led students to do well. That was the narrative.
This is amazing. And there are so many questions on here. I'm not really sure how to handle all of them. So I'm going to squeeze in one more because I feel it leaves us on a note of action and things that we can do in the next little bit. And it just came up. So here it is. Dr. Hrabowski mentioned the importance of having those who aren't in marginalized groups also invested.
Yes.
What are some of the strategies that we can do to do this without adding further emotional labor to someone who's already facing marginalization and is associated with mental toll?
As you know, I start by saying I surprised people when I decided to be the PI on our advance grant. The National Science Foundation has a program called Advance to further the causes of women in science, in STEM. And they use a lot of that approach is there in terms of building community cohorts of women. And so we've had women to go on in chairs and deans and others. But the point is, people want to know, why would you do that? You're a man. I said, because men should be as concerned about the paucity of women in STEM as whites should be concerned about the paucity of people of color in STEM. These are humankind issues. They don't belong to anybody. And when we put too much pressure on the 1 or 2 Black professionals or Indigenous professionals, it leaves them worn out. And so we need these allies, is what we talk about. As we work to increase minority faculty at UMBC, we have allies. Women have always been more willing to be supported, but getting white male allies. And so if you look at another of my books called Holding Fast to Dreams, which is about growing up in Birmingham and becoming inspired about becoming a mathematician and producing scientists, on the cover is a white male and 2 students, one from South Korea and one Black. And people said, why would you put a white male on the cover? Because I wanted people to know there are white males who care about these issues, because white males are in the greatest position of power. If you look at any of the national academies in our country, and I suspect in yours, that will be the predominant group. And I don't say that as an angry Black man or nationally. There's some wonderful people there. I'm meeting them in the National Academy of Engineering now. And the point is, but they can help us to own this issue. It should be a Canadian issue, an American issue, a human issue, not a women's issue, not a minority issue. Nikki, very quickly though, there was a problem. There was a question there that I've got to answer about the supporting adults with math anxiety, because in our society, and then so many people, and it happens because we math teachers, early on, we give you a look that says you belong here or you don't. Whether we realize it or not, we do. And usually if the person doesn't get it like that really fast, we say, well, we'll help you get through this, but it's not for you. Well, the fact is that's the wrong mindset. I would say, and women in your society and ours, it's so important that women not say to their daughters, I wasn't good in math. Women say, well, what do you say? Just say, you're still learning it. Or just say, the teacher and I just didn't click, for example. But what you want to do is you start with this. Just say, I want to learn it. It's my saying, I wanted to learn French. Je veux parler le français. I wanted to learn it. And it's about having that attitude. You can learn it. Anybody can learn more math. Anyone can. They just need support and to try, and working with their kids. And it's okay to say to your kids, I don't know, but I want to learn with you. So it's the attitude, because math is at the base of a lot of this STEM work. It's the attitude. It's the same thing with technology. Older people are always saying, well, I can't do that. It's the young people. No, we all learned in COVID, we could do more with technology than we thought. And for college presidents, the funny part is, I'm telling people retiring, you better become more independent before you leave, because I'm used to saying, my people will handle it. I'm now my people. So it's attitude, I'm saying, that's really important, Nikki.
Thank you so much. This has been an amazing opportunity to learn from you. So thank you so much. I do want to let you have the last word. So there was one more question. I'll just toss it out. What inspiring words would you like to share as your last words to those who are minorities that want to get a seat at this scientific table?
Let me just say, when students say to me, and young people, things have never been so bad in our world, in our country, with the wars and all the political issues. And I'm saying, no, go back to the 60s, either the 1960s or the 1860s in our country. And you see this division like this. And yet, if you go to the 1960s, you'll see, believe it or not, in our country, and you'll see the same kind of evolution in Canada, only about 10% of Americans had a college degree in the 60s. It's now to maybe 30-some%. But the fact is, for both of our countries, we've had progress. And those people of color who have been fortunate to get that education have been able to get more done, even if they're still having challenges. But we must be inspired by the hard work of so many people who came before us to get us to this place, And even though we may face challenges and people looking a certain way, we are more privileged than so many. In Canada and America, we are two of the most privileged societies the world has ever seen. And the challenge is that we can, as I said, if you look at my Harvard talk, we can be better. We can be much better, both institutions and each of us as a person. And so I always leave people with the line, keep hope alive. We don't have time to be discouraged. We must be inspired by all those who came before us. And we must know that we can work to be better every day. Every day. Keep hope alive.
That is just the perfect way to end this lecture. Thank you so much. I will say that I have found today incredibly inspiring. I am so inspired by you and everything you have accomplished and everything you have achieved. So thank you for giving so generously of your time today. We really appreciate it. I also want to thank all of the audience who chimed in with these amazing questions. There's tons of people just saying, awesome, awesome, we need more. So thank you to you. Thank you to all of our tech support and to our team at Elsevier for their support, as well as Dr. Daniel C. Andreae for his ongoing support of the lecture series. We are going to ask everyone to chime in, let us know how today went. We're going to put up a QR code at the end of this that you can send in your evaluations. We also encourage you to suggest amazing speakers for our future sessions and to think inclusively about the voices that are often not brought to these tables as you're thinking of your recommendations. So again, thank you, Dr. Hrabowski. Thank you to our audience, and we will see you all at the next TIER event. Have a great evening.